Let's tackle the rules. First, I can only use sorceries. Second, if I defeat an enemy using a sorcery, I must discard it. And just because it sounded fun, I tried to make things thematic. Sorceries are loosely categorized in Elden Ring, and they can be buffed by certain staves and even armor. For example, the Albert set buffs the Thorn sorceries, Ranni's Witch set buffs Ice sorceries, and so on. This added a layer of logistical complexity that probably wasn't worth it, but hopefully somebody appreciates the drip. Alright, we need a fictional character with a massive brain. MM? What's MM? Oh, Megamind. That's perfect. That'll work. Honestly, not bad. That's pretty good, actually. I'm very happy with that. Okay, now we just need a name, and I think I have the perfect name. No maidens. Perfect. After grabbing Torrent, I ran around Stormveil to grab the Academy Scroll and sprinted to Muriel at the Church of Vows. I picked Muriel as my sorcery teacher for 2 reasons. Unlike my other options, Muriel doesn't disappear or die on me, and the other reason is, he's awesome. It's a Tortoise Pope. Anyway, I handed over the Academy Scroll and purchased what I could, and grabbed Carrion Glintblade Staff while I was in the area. This will allow me to cast Glintblade sorceries. Now back to Limgrave to fight the Mad Pumpkinhead, guarding Sorceress Sellen. I used Swift Glintstone Shard because it was the worst spell I had at this point that did not require a specific staff. Because of the thematic rule, Sellen's questline was very important. I spoke with her to start the quest and bought any sorceries that I could afford. Next stop was Rhea Lucaria Crystal Tunnel, where I grabbed Shatter Earth and used this Glintstone Pebble to take down the Crystallian. Considering how strong Pebble is, this was probably a mistake, but we play it pretty fast and loose around here. This fight nets you the first highly coveted Smithing Stone Bellbearing. I started the questline for apparently Taupes, not Tops, bought some spells, and made my way into the Academy to grab the Conspectus Scroll, Comet, and the Graven School Talisman before heading to the boss. Red Wolf was kind of an annoying fight. It's somewhat resistant to magic damage, and I did not yet have access to gravity magic, which does physical damage, or the Mount Gelmir magic, which does fire damage. I also didn't want to use a good spell on a bad boss, so I equipped the Glintblade Staff and Glintblade Phalanx and got to work. Aside from half my casts being dodged or blocked by random furniture, this fight was relatively easy, if not a bit frustrating. Discard Glintblade Phalanx and grab the spare Academy key, then I gave it to Taupes in exchange for the Erudition gesture, which would let me into the converted Fringe Tower holding the Cannon and Gavel of Haima, and I also grabbed Taupes Barrier. Oh look, it's the YouTube commenters who told me that Taupes Barrier was good, it's just that I wasn't using it correctly. This spell is shit. You know it is. Even Taupes knows it is.
I can teach you sorceries, as promised, only none of them are particularly great.
Now it was Caelid time, where I picked up the Meteorite Staff and the Staff of Loss, as well as Rock Sling and Night Comet. I then tried to skip the Millicent questline by using this dog to kill Gowry, but apparently the stench of my unshowered ass was enough to do it, only to find out that Gowry can transfer his soul to these bug things? I don't know, I'll have to send a letter to VatiVidya about that one later. In the meantime, I would have to do some of the parts of the Millicent questline to get access to the invisibility spells. The final piece of the puzzle was the Sage Gear, which can be found in Stillwater Cave. With all that done, I was finally able to use Night Sorceries, and my first victim was the Magma Worm Maker. This was an easy but tedious fight that serves as the alternate path to the Altus Plateau, where we eventually find Grandpa Azur enjoying his retirement overlooking Mount Gelmir. I took Comet Azur back to Sellen in exchange for a key that unlocks a door prohibiting access to primeval sorcerer Lusat. Grab Stars of Ruin and head back to Sellen, who we will not see again until after Radahn. Then I defeated this Erdtree avatar with Great Glintstone Shard, which gave me the Magic Shrouding Crack tier. Discarded Great Glintstone Shard, and I picked up the Carrion Glintstone Staff from the study hall. I noticed I was catching mad disrespect from these robes.
Look at you. Are you out of your mind?
So I had my boy outfit me in possibly the best looking armor in all the lands between. As much as I hate Moongrum, he had the right idea. This is what I'd be using to cast the Carrion sorceries from now on. To test out my new gear, I went to the Academy Crystal Cave, picked up the Crystal Staff, and challenged the Crystallian duo. Despite being a giant blade, the Carrion Greatsword is not buffed by the Glint Blade Staff, but is instead buffed by the Glint Stone Staff, which, perplexingly, does not affect its namesake spells, and oh my god, why did I do this? Defeating these two grants you Crystal Release, which we will find out is trash, and Terra Magica, also not great. Discard Carrion Greatsword and head to Carrion Manor, where I traded the Cannon of Haima for Carrion Piercer. This decision may be disagreeable to some, but hear me out. For a cannon spell, it's low range, low DPS, and has a high cast time. It's very underwhelming. Unless your intent is to kill a bunch of goats, then it's exceptional. But back to Loretta. Carrion Piercer is another blade sorcery, not boosted by the blade staff. It's buffed by the glintstone staff, and thankfully does decent damage. When charged, it also staggers, which is useful for interrupting attacks. This fight was still pretty tricky, and at the end we actually traded, which is obviously good for me, because I respond. Get wrecked, nerd. Loretta, of course, drops her Great Bow sorcery and opens the path to Ranni and Selvius. I had some people in my last video defending him, saying his name is pronounced Selvius, not Selvius. And to that I will say, just know, you're defending a predator. Unfortunately, I was too poor to buy his spells, so it was now time to take on the first 4 of the game's major bosses, starting with Margit. I donned my best blue collar outfit and equipped the Stone Sorcerer staff along with Shatter Earth, both of which were obtained in the Raya Lucaria Crystal Tunnel. And just like blue collar labor, this fight has a lot of nuance that you wouldn't know about unless you're doing it. For example, Shatter Earth has a hyper armor-like effect, but only after you begin the downswing part of the spell, which means you have to cast it sooner than you feel like you should. It also lowers your hitbox, allowing you to dodge underneath some attacks. Overall, this was a frustrating fight due to Margit's tendency to jump away from attacks, which only gets worse in the second phase. The best strategy here was to just trade hits and wear him down through attrition. Discard Shatter Earth and get ready for Godrick. To get there, I had to make it through the main gate. I gave him my patented crossover, but they caught me traveling. I did eventually make it into Godrick's arena, and I was a bit over-leveled for this fight. Here's how it went. Next was Radahn, and the legends say that an infamous undefeated swordswoman was almost dealt defeat at the hands of this man. Which is odd, considering all Melenia had to do was hire a literal prisoner with access to magic glintblade, and it wouldn't have been an issue. But decisions were made and we can't go back now. Thankfully for my own sanity, magic glintblade is buffed by the glintblade staff, and being able to cast the spell on horseback is basically cheating. Even stage 2 was a complete cakewalk. I discarded Glintstone Shard, and with Radahn defeated, I could buy his armor, and was finally able to use gravity magic. I also picked up Eternal Darkness from a tower overlooking Radahn's arena, and Collapsing Stars from the catacombs just behind it. Then with my supervisor's gentle guidance, I performed open heart surgery on Sellen. I forgot the anesthesia. I also grabbed Ambush Shard sitting on a corpse in the same room. Before I could finish Sellen's questline, I had to take down Rennala. I started off with a diplomatic approach. So, can you guys even read? But I was never any good at diplomacy. So I tried the recently acquired Ambush Shard, and it worked well on the small barriers up until, 80% magic resistance. I played around with a few options, but found an interesting quirk when using Night Maiden's Mist. Not only does the spell do bonkers damage at this point in the game, but it also damages Rennala through her shield. The only problem is, it will leave her floating around at 1 health, which means you actually have to break the barrier at least once to enter second phase. It's not super useful, but if you want to stop Rennala from transmogrifying children into gravestones, this is a good way to do it. In her second phase, just run around her in a clockwise motion, and she falls pretty easily. Once Rennala is defeated, you can complete the final part of Sellen's questline, vanquishing Witch Hunter Jaren. Basically, you just gotta keep hitting him until he's dead. Once he is, discard Collapsing Stars, and you are rewarded with the ability to buy Shard Spiral, and obtain the oh-so-important Azur and Lusat armor sets. The only piece of the puzzle left was their staves. Lusat's staff can be found in Caelid after defeating the Nox duo. I was already wearing Radahn's armor, so I equipped Rock Sling, and yep, that'll do it. Give him a few more of those, run to the back of the arena, and grab the staff. Discard Rock Sling, then TP to Raya Lucaria to pick up Shattering Earth and Azur's staff. This would allow us to cast all kinds of fun stuff. Before Leyndell, I wanted to pick up the Magic Scorpion Charm from Selvius and all of the goodies that went along with Ranni's questline, except I didn't really want to do Ranni's questline. Well, as it turns out, you can skip it. The whole thing. From basically the beginning of the game. If you find a way to die on this rock, you can choose to respawn at a Marika statue atop the Moonlight Altar. Luckily, there's a giant poison swamp right next to this location. Once you TP up here, you can find Ranni in this dark cave, and marry her if you want to. No need to deal with Nokron or Estelle. You can even get the Dark Moon Greatsword. Pretty neat skip. And while consummating the marriage, I also received Ranni's full moon. I fucking hate that show. Up next was Leyndell, and everyone knows about the poison mist cheese, but apparently you can also freezing mist cheese this guy. It takes 20 minutes. Yeah. Once in Leyndell, I opted to try this skip I saw on the TikToks. Most people know about perfect pitch, which allows you to recreate musical notes that you've heard. Well, I was born with perfect gamer replication, and after only 7 attempts, I was able to perfectly recreate this skip. Very impressive. Godfrey Shade was next, and who cares? This guy is the pinwheel of Elden Ring. Oh, is he gonna stomp and thrust his axe into the ground again? I'm just happy I was able to make good use of carrion phalanx. The Morgott fight I was a little nervous about. Historically, I've never had trouble with Morgott, but that's because every time I fought him, I either skipped the fight, or it wasn't me fighting him. Even in my first playthrough, I had to summon a friend to help me out, but this time, I'd be alone. I equipped my best gear at the time, which was Night Comet, Sage Armor, and the Staff of Loss, and I absolutely owned him. I think a lot of bosses rely heavily on input reads, and it seems like the invisibility sorceries can't be read. So he just stood there, taking shot after shot. Just goes to show that sometimes it's not the thing that's the problem, it's the fear about the thing. So get in there, champ. You got this. After Morgott was defeated, I was well on my way to committing my first cardinal sin. How exciting for a fledgling criminal. Once here, you can very quickly grab the Briars of Punishment sorcery along with Zamor Ice Storm and the Smithing Stone Bellbearing number 3. I also grabbed the Garbage Rain of Trash spell after using up all of my Prism Stones. Now it was time for the battle of the game's 2 largest craniums. First I tried Crystal Release, and this spell is frustrating. Under perfect conditions, it can do crazy damage, but it almost never works properly. The hitbox feels really janky and the damage is inconsistent, even if the spell was cast inside of a boss. I only bring this up because there are a lot of spells in this game that are unique and fun, but just straight up suck. So you're highly incentivized to use the traditional, boring, soul arrow type spells. Anyways, I used Crystal Release to kill a regular mob in exchange for arguably an even worse spell, Briars of Sin. But let's get back to Fire Giant. For the actual fight, I decided to hold no punches. I equipped one of the game's strongest sorceries, Carrion Slicer, and let him have it. This amount of damage felt criminal. Then I realized what was happening. I was committing a foot felony. With all the adrenaline pumping through my veins, I had no time to rationalize. I kept going. Eventually, Fire Giant figured out what I was doing, and very intelligently ripped his foot right off his leg to eliminate weakness. But it was too late. The damage was done. I quickly finished him off and went to tell Melenia about my exploits. She wasn't happy. She called me a foot felon and lit herself on fire.
Goodbye.
Well, this was no time to mourn. After all, I worked in the US and there was no bereavement leave. I had to soldier on. There are a lot of goodies to grab here, like the Smithing Stone Bellbearing and the highest tier upgrade materials. Once finished, head to everyone's favorite boss fight. The first spell in the arsenal I tried was Crystal Torrent, but it was too slow. Then I tried Meteorite, and it was even slower. Meteorite might be the slowest casting spell in the game. Next was the Garbage Rain of Trash spell, and well, it lives up to its name. So I caved and tried Comet. Of course, this would have worked. It has high DPS and can pierce enemies, potentially doing crazy damage. But I really didn't want to use this just yet. I finally landed on Glintstone Ice Crag, which did almost as much DPS as Comet. I learned from my last video that the optimal strat is to just focus one Godskin and ignore the other. Naturally, the big guy is the obvious choice because, well, larger hitbox. The other thing is, if you can find the right pillar, when the big Godskin is rolling, it's a great time to attack. He basically stuns himself, and in my experience, the other Godskin just stares at you, menacingly. Having said all that, this fight still took me quite a while. Discard Glintstone Ice Crag and keep moving. Maliketh wasn't too bad. I used Glintstone Comet Shard and Azur's gear. This fight should have been much smoother, but I did this after a long day at work and my gamer brain did not have the requisite amount of caffeine to function optimally. I was also committed to the whole not leveling up health thing because while you can play FromSoft games however you want to, we all know there is only one right way to play. With Maliketh down, I discarded Glintstone Comet Shard and I could purchase his armor, which would allow me to cast the Death Sorceries. But I still needed to get the Prince of Death Staff, which brings me to the Gargoyles. My sorcery arsenal was running empty at this point and I needed something big to take him down fast. So I chose Meteorite, and this fight quickly became a test of who can one-shot who faster. Occasionally I would get lucky with their moveset, and there was a lot of trading. Eventually I figured out that Radahn's armor gave me enough defense to survive a single attack if I had a rune arc active. This allowed me to play with a bit more confidence, and I was able to take them both out. I hitched a ride to the Deep-Root Depths to pick up my prize. While the Prince of Death staff has the highest sorcery scaling in the game, it requires a massive stat investment, one that I was neither willing nor had the means to attain. So, despite looking great, the death sorceries were a subpar choice in practice, often being outperformed by sorceries with lower stat requirements. Still, I figured I should give them a fair shake. So I went to fight this Tibia Mariner at the Altus Plateau for the Tibia Summon sorcery, which I was hoping would let me summon Budget Wolnir blasting spells out of his eyes. Instead, what you get are these guys, which is okay, I guess. I was able to use them to beat this solo Godskin, which would allow me to grab the Gelmir Glintstone staff, letting me cast Roiling Magma. If you want a crash course on how to design a spell, look no further. It's got personality, 2 different casting modes, big fire damage, leaves behind environmental hazards, looks great, thank you, I'll have another. Anyways, use this to take down this big dumb dragon and yoink Adula's Moonblade. Discard Roiling Magma, and the only mandatory bosses we have left are Gideon, Godfrey, and Radagon. I wanted to do something special for Gideon. From the moment you meet this guy, he just reeks of entitlement.
Remember your place, newcomer.
I feel like I needed to knock him down a peg, so I went to get the Cerulean Hidden Tear from the Tree Worm using Rennala's Full Moon. With a little help from Environmental Fire, we succeeded. I once again donned my blue collar gear and went to find the stronger of the 2 labor-themed spells, Rock Blaster. Now I was prepared to give him the Proletariat Pounding. Oh! Oh! No way, dude! No shot. I couldn't accept this. I started a whole new game, got back to where I was with a little bit more intelligence, and...
Here you'd come to stand before the Elden Ring.
Alright, here we go. Come on, yeah, give it to him. Yes, yes. Hell yeah, dude. Oh my god. Godfrey was easy, Comet's OP. Before Radagon, let's attempt some of the optional bosses. First up, Melenia. I had to get the medallion, so I went to Castle Sol. Commander Naill and his lackeys were like butter on my blade. As long as I didn't get caught by one of the Ash summons, the fight went well. In the second phase, Naill would mostly spam his jump move, which I got used to fairly quickly. I discarded Adula's Moonblade, grabbed the medallion, and went to fight Loretta. At this point, Topes is the game's certified L collector.
Did I not mention I'm a Bluntstone?
But I would be remiss if I failed to mention yet another reason why Topes Barrier is bad. In this fight, I opted for Ranni's Dark Moon. It has high damage, applies Frostbite, and it absorbs enemy spell projectiles like Eternal Darkness does, which is the better version of Topes Barrier. I do feel for the guy, but canonically I guess it makes sense that a demigod would develop a much more sophisticated spell than just some random dude.
I'm sorry I'm so useless. I truly am.
As for the fight, I could block every single one of her ranged spells, so as long as I stayed away from melee combat, it was no issue. Discard Ranni's Dark Moon, and what you see are the sorceries I had left to deal with Melenia. Not a lot of great options, with the only standout being Stars of Ruin. If you're wondering how I got Ancient Death Rancor, I used Briars of Sin along with the Heretic Staff and the Albrecht set on a Deathrite bird in Liurnia. I tried Loretta's Mastery first, and while the damage was good, it was a bit too slow for my liking. Then I respec to use Death Rancor, and I had the same problem with Melenia that I had with Godfrey, which is their tendency to dodge projectiles, and she ended up taking barely any damage. Stars of Ruin had the same issue, although that spell fared a bit better. I had heard that she was cheesable using some of the mist spells, so I tried Freezing Fog for fun, and it actually works, at least in the first phase. Once Melenia phase changes, she becomes way more aggressive and it's no longer viable. I also tried Night Comet, and to nobody's surprise, it absolutely booty blasted her. But of course, I had previously used those spells, so they weren't allowed. With more time or perhaps more gamer skill, I could have taken her down, but this video is already a month late, so undefeated she shall remain. Next on my list was Dragonlord Placidusax. Apparently there is a very silly animation that happens when you cast Loretta's Mastery and sprint immediately after. Elden Ring is an otherwise gloomy and serious game. I am fighting the ancient Lord of Dragons. So this wonky animation, combined with a blue head-ass looking dude wearing effeminate armor set, was very amusing to me. It was all I could focus on, so I don't know if it was dumb luck or some Wu-Wei trying not to try power kicking in, but I took down this boss on my first attempt with basically no effort. The last optional boss I would attempt was Mogh, and I knew I was going to need a heavy hitter, so I traded Comet Azur for Great Oracular Bubble. Now the haters might say I'm crazy, but Oracular Bubble outperformed Comet Azur on all of my field tests. If you take a look at the babometer here, you can see what I mean. I put on my juvenile robes and went to test it out. The damage output was actually way higher than I was expecting, but I knew we could do better. For some reason, the Arrow's Reach Talisman extends the effective range of Great Oracular Bubble, so I picked that up from Limgrave and used Crystal Torrent, which I got from pounding some crystal, to take down Godfrey for the Godfrey icon. I also equipped Lusat's Staff and Terra Magica. All of our new gear netted us a whopping 750 damage increase. I'd like to know Mogh's thoughts when a blue adult man dressed as a child walks in with a can of fucking Fubbles and starts blasting him. He could barely make it to me before I got him into second phase, where the chant would always kill me. So I went to get the Purifying Crystal tier, and instead of naming my character Mega Mind, I should have named him Mega Stupid, because Mogh's chant move is in fact a bleed proc, and bleed procs deal % health damage. So whether you have 2000 health or 400, it's still going to do a third or whatever. So the lower your health value, the worse this flask becomes. I could have just as easily survived with a Crimson Flask. Mogh's second phase is kinda brutal, but eventually I was able to dodge this multi-hit combo, which gave me some breathing room. Then, as the brilliant strategist I was, I purposely got him stuck behind these tombstones, which allowed me to finish him off. When people talk about annoying bosses in Elden Ring, I don't think Radagon gets enough hate. For starters, he can block ranged spell projectiles, which severely limits what you're able to use. He has a seemingly unending amount of combos, deals ridiculously high damage, he's resistant to most attacks, has 3 mini phases where he gets new moves in each one, and if that wasn't enough, he can teleport at will while attacking and keep doing it. Needless to say, this fight took me a long time. Not to mention that due to my self-imposed thematic rule, I wouldn't be able to use 2 different spells that corresponded to 2 different armor sets. I was just testing things out, but for example, I wouldn't be able to use both Ranni's Dark Moon, which requires the Snow Witch gear, and Shattering Crystal, which requires the Crystal gear, in the same fight. I landed on Shattering Crystal for Radagon because it has high damage, relatively low cast time, and he doesn't block it if you're in melee range. Instead of half committing to intelligence and half to health, I respec'd into a full glass cannon int build, which gave me a much needed damage boost. He was one-shotting me for the most part anyway, so I didn't really need the HP. If you're quick, you can land 2 full casts of Shattering Crystal while he's turning around at the start of the fight. I also found some guaranteed attack timings and was able to get him into his third phase pretty consistently, but would always die to either his wide-ranging Hammer Slam or some teleport garbage. Both of which I still have trouble dodging. At long last, I had a God run and was able to take him down, thus signaling half of the fight was over. Then it was Elden Beast time, and I chose Shard Spiral as my weapon of choice. This spell is unaffiliated with any gear, and has the added bonus of dealing unholy amounts of damage to large creatures. I had a feeling that Radagon was going to be the real issue in this run, so I was hoping I could beat Elden Beast on my first try, but I ran into this wall, and Elden Beast was left with like a fifth of his health bar. After another dozen or so attempts at Radagon, I made it back into EV territory, and there was another problem: Elden Stars. I almost made the exact same mistake, but by some act of God I was able to avoid both the wall and just enough projectiles to leave me with a sliver of health. Then all I had to do was dodge some rings and give it one final blasting, and we got him. here is my tier list, which I'm sure I'll be ripped apart for in the comments, and if you liked the video, please consider a sub. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks, and I'll catch you on the next one.